Eileen Hedy Schultz, a member of the Board of Directors, will introduce this year's commencement speaker, Laurie Anderson.
Congratulations, class of 2012. I'm also a graduate of SVA. I know how proud and happy you are at this moment, yes? And to my students and to all, Sarang Heyo. That means I love you. Commencement. Thank you. Today I have the great honor of introducing our guest speaker, one of America's most famous creative pioneers. An Illinois native, she is in our language a phenom. Her great curiosity has all but erased creative boundaries and moved her into the areas of musician, singer, songwriter, performance artist, sculptor, photographer, children's book illustrator, film and video maker, critic, art historian, poet, and inventor. She's toured worldwide with innumerable shows, performances, and huge multimedia events, all of which earned her a great many worldwide and well-deserved honors and awards. Her visual work has appeared in major museums both here and abroad, including MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art here in New York City. She has written 6 books, was appointed the first artist in residence of NASA. Yes. And her latest exhibition of drawings opens tomorrow evening at the Vito Schnabel Gallery right here in New York City. How fortunate we are to have as our guest commencement speaker, a true inspiration and phenom, Ms. Laurie Anderson.
First of all, you did it. Congratulations. There are lots of things in the world you plan to do and things you hope to do, and then there are the things that you actually do. So congratulations, you've done it. You've actually finally graduated. And it's such a completely wonderful time to start out as an artist. There's a really dynamic, shifting political climate in the United States, full of all sorts of challenges and big cultural and economic changes, and as well as huge new cultural scenes opening up all over the world, and networks of museums and arts institutions, and a global audience that's expanding every day. And artists are really no longer considered exotic or decorative or elitist. For better or worse, art is an industry. And years ago, the commentator Karl Rove said, "We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality." And by that, he meant he was the actor, he was the writer, the creator of this reality. Now, these days, creating reality is large-scale business, and the people who can do this the best, the people who are trained to use their imaginations to shape new realities, are the artists. And it's as if the world was reborn, and suddenly, the artists were in charge of the most important things. And by artists, I mean you, the new artists. And in addition to this great inheritance and open field as new artists, you have some really elegant and super sharp digital tools and skills. And whether you're making pencil drawings or movies or dance or sculpture or buildings, these tools are getting sharper and smaller and cheaper and lighter. It's also easier these days to get your work out without necessarily going through big institutions or corporations or collectors. So artists become more egalitarian and more about self-starting, and design and art are also coming together in very synergistic ways. And I'm thinking of this, of MakerBot. This is the artist-designed 3D printing operation in Brooklyn, where you can now scan and create 3D copies of small objects in your own printer So if you need like part of your glasses remade, you can scan it and print it into make a three-dimensional object. And the cost of this printer used to be $100,000. Now it's $800. Plus, you don't have to live in one of the big art cities to do art anymore. You can be anywhere. And I can't really think of a better time to be starting out as an artist. Even though, I have to say, after all of this, it can be really kind of daunting just to get started. When I graduated from art school, I was terrified. I mean, calling myself an artist seemed ridiculous. It seemed totally pretentious. I just couldn't say I'm an artist without practically choking. You know, artists were Picasso and Pollock, and who did I think I was? You know, and also I had a very, very sketchy idea about what I was going to be doing. So basically, I decided to stay in bed until I could think of a really good reason to get up. So I stayed in bed for months, and I would just lie there and look at the sky and sort of drift. And at the time, I could afford to do this because I taught at night schools and colleges in downtown Manhattan and Staten Island, and the classes were mostly accountants and secretaries and who were like on the slow track, going to school 2 nights a week for about like 10 years. So I didn't have to get to work until around 6 in the evening, and mostly the people in the class were really just laid anywhere or were way too tired to concentrate. Now, I was teaching Egyptian architecture and Assyrian sculpture, but I wasn't really keeping up with the Egyptological journals, so a slide would come up in the class, and I would look at it, and I would just draw a complete blank. I couldn't remember a single thing about it. So I would just make things up about this or that pharaoh, and the students would write it down, and I would test them on it. So I figured so much of history is speculation anyway, that, you know, that maybe it was important to design theories for certain unexplainable things. Like in some of the pyramids, there were these holes on the exterior, the shape of mailbox slots, and they were connected by a long shaft that ran at an odd angle down into the core of the pyramid into the mummy's chamber. And nobody really knew why the slots and shafts were there, so what I told the students was that they were there because they were oriented to the sun, so that on only one day a year, let's say for the sake of argument, the mummy's birthday, the sun would stream down the shaft into the inner chamber and shine into the mummy's eyes and wake him up. Now, eventually I did feel a bit of guilt about this. I mean, since this was supposedly a history course and not, you know, free-form fiction. So I quit. Not before I was fired, but it was very, very close. So what is it that motivates you, and how do you find out what you like, what you want to do? Well, first of all, you already know the answer to those questions. It just sometimes takes a little bit of time to find them. You should also take comfort in the fact that most people don't know what they're looking for. And a few years ago, as she mentioned, I had a very strange gig, which was being the first artist in residence at NASA. And here's how that happened. I was having a really bad day in the studio, one of those days when you think, what am I puttering around like this for? I mean, this isn't interesting. It's like, it's nothing. I don't even know what to call it. Like, call it nothing. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here. I cannot be the only one who flounders around like this. Anyway, in the middle of this sort of one-person psychodrama, the phone rang and the voice said, hello, I'm from NASA, and we'd like you to be the first artist in residence here. And I said, you're not from NASA. And I hung up the phone. Anyway, he called back, and eventually I realized he was from NASA and that they wanted me to be the first artist in residence there. And so I said, okay, what does artist in residence mean? I mean, what does that mean in a space program? And they said, well, they didn't know what that meant, and what did I think it meant? And I thought, who are you people? Anyway, I took the job because I thought, great, this is, there's no agenda. I get to invent a job. So I was the first artist in residence in a couple of years for NASA, and I just started by going around to like the various different centers, Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, and the Mission Control in Houston, and the Hubble Space Telescope in Baltimore, and just kind of seeing what was going on. And I got to meet a lot of people who you don't run across in the art world, you know, robotics engineers and designers and mathematicians and nanotechnologists, and the guy who built and designed the fastest car in the world. And I realized that scientists have a lot more in common with artists than I thought, because they don't really know what they're looking for either. And they do it in a very similar way. They get an idea, they get a hunch, and then, like artists, they make something. And then they look at it, and then comes the big question, the key question, how do you know when you're done? Because in order to know when you're done, you need to know what you're making. So paradoxically, you have to actually make something to find out what it is that you're making. Now, at NASA, I had a lot of conversations with nanotechnologists, and they were the ones who seemed to have a lot of kind of time on their hands. You know, everybody else there is fairly busy, you'll be glad to know. And they were standing there with their nanotechnologist badges, and I was standing there with my artist in residence badge, and we had these long and kind of odd and abstract conversations. And they were often citing Einstein, and they said Einstein rejected some of his most important theories. And why? Because he said they weren't beautiful. And I thought, wait a minute, what does that mean? I mean, what's beautiful is true? What kind of science is this, and what kind of beauty is he thinking about anyway? Well, one of the things he meant, apparently, by beauty, it turned out to be symmetry, which is a kind of a Western ideal of beauty. But take symmetry to Japan, for example, and often it's considered sort of idiotic, sort of moronic. You know, why does having two things that look alike, that rhyme like moon and June, make them good, make them better, make them beautiful? Because we ourselves have two eyes, two arms, two legs, and bicameral brains. And I mean, maybe there are more interesting ways for two objects to relate to each other instead of being like duplicates. Maybe one is enormous and one is really tiny, or there's a catalytic relationship in which one thing changes the other. But I think they asked me to do this NASA job because I'm a multimedia artist, and they assumed that I would do some like sexy techno project, like bounce light from one satellite onto another satellite onto the dark side of the moon. And so when I told them I was going to write a long poem, they were like, a poem? Why would you write a poem? I mean, they just couldn't believe it. And by the way, as a small aside, if you're still wondering what to call yourself, really consider multimedia artist. It's kind of a meaningless, when you think about it, it's like pencil artist or wood artist, but it allows you a huge amount of freedom. And then when you're an architect and you suddenly make a movie, no one can say, wait a minute, get back over there with the architects. And so it comes in unbelievably handy. So anyway, I found NASA really very inspiring, and they're working on some amazing things like some giant, really art projects. The Stairway to Space, which is a kind of elevator being designed out of nanotubes, which are electronics that grow like biology. And the idea is to make a stairway, sort of an electronic jack-and-a-beanstalk construction, and then you just haul things up to the platform, which is above the pull of gravity, and then you just drive off. No big boom, no big blast, bypassing, the gas-guzzling kaboom thing of the space program and saving fortunes on fuel and energy. It's really, really very gorgeous. So there it is, the Stairway to Space. And no artist would have to explain why this is a work of art. It would be obvious, and it would be immediately accepted in most biennials as a multimedia artwork done by the NASA Art Collective. Now, another big NASA art project is the greening of Mars, and this is a project with a 10,000-year timeline. And it is really inspiring to walk into a conference project room with a whiteboard, and surrounding it is a 10,000-year timeline. And the objective, of course, is to add enough air and water and plants to Mars to make it inhabitable by the time we get there in the distant future. Because the truth is, we're going to have to go somewhere, and Mars is the most likely place. And so the project is called the Terraforming of Mars. And of course, since we know so much about taking care of planets, we're going to take care of Mars. Now, I should also say that although I was the first artist in residence, I was also the last artist in residence. There was a senator reviewing the NASA budget, and he was a kind of like a whistleblower kind of guy, and he's looking at the budget. 45 trillion for spy satellites, 4.3 for optics and drones, check. Wait, whoa, what's this? $20,000 for an artist in residence? What? This is an outrage. So it was canceled. Now, I'm trying to reinstate this, not for myself, but for some other artists who can continue this, because I think there should be an artist in residence at NASA. I think there should be an artist in residence in Congress, artist in residence in the White House, artist in residence in the Supreme Court. Artists have a unique point of view. And why isn't that part of the bigger picture in our country? Let's see, Department of Defense, Department of Health and Welfare, Department of Art, the art department. So please, you new artists, please make that happen. Meanwhile, here's something to keep in mind. No one will ever ask you to do the thing you really want to do. You've got to take my word on this. Do not wait for this to happen. It will never happen. Things will happen to you, but this will never happen. So just think of what you'd like to do, what you dream of doing, and then just start doing it. When I was starting out doing performances with film and electronics, it was in small film festivals in New York. And when I say film festival, I mean 8 people in a loft, looking at each other's movies. And I thought to myself, now what would it be like if I could show these in a bigger place, maybe like with an actual, like a screen, and maybe with more than 8 people. And so I put my work into kind of a primitive brochure, and I sent it to about 500 art centers in Europe, and I said, I'm preparing a fall tour for Europe this year, and I'd like to come to your center and do a film performance. And now, I didn't have a fall tour, and I hadn't the foggiest idea of what a fall tour would be like. But one of the 500, out of the 500, about 3 answered, possibly by total mistake. And so that fall, I packed up this equipment in some cases, put wheels on the cases, and I went out on my fall tour, or what I thought a fall tour could be. So anyway, also around this time I had a friend, an older artist, and I was always complaining, saying things, like, I want to be an artist, but I have to figure out how to pay the rent and get a place to work, and how would I do this? How would I have time to work? And he just kept saying in the most irritating way possible, just do your work. And I said, but Richard, that's really easy for you to say, but I have to be practical. I have to pay the rent, and he kept saying that, and it took me a really long time to figure out what he was saying. And it was basically about priorities, of course, that if your priority is paying the rent, then you'll probably pay the rent, but you might not get around to making art. But if your priority is to do your work, then that's where your very, very best energy will go. And paying the rent will just kind of automatically happen. I know this sounds kind of ridiculous, but please believe me on this. You just have to take this one completely on faith. I want to tell you a couple more things about what I've tried to learn as an artist, and the first has to do with work, and actually the word work. And as artists, we call what we do our work. Come see my new work, and I just want to say that we might be overdoing this work ethic thing, and may want to borrow something, for example, from musicians who aren't always talking about their work and the meaning of their work and how to do their work. Musicians play music. They don't work music. And so anyway, I'm thinking also of one of my favorite writers, a British writer named Tom Hodgkinson, and he wrote a book called How to Be Idle. And it's a truly revolutionary book. And Tom is a dedicated slacker, and he writes about what it means to work and what it means to simply say, I have this huge looming deadline, but actually I think I'm just going to go down to the river and take a walk. Or maybe, I'm going to head out this afternoon and have a beer with my friend. And the book reads kind of like an artist's manifesto, on how to wake up and learn to experience the world, and also how to figure out the great skill of relaxing without being entertained. Now, in his book, Hodgkinson also talks about work in relation to being sick. And he says, what happened to the idea of convalescence, for example? Remember what that was? After you recovered, there was a time when you just took it easy for a while. And those faraway days when people, recovered and then they went off to the south of France to convalesce for several months. And now people, when they get sick, they're supposed to work through it or get right back to work as soon as possible, as if getting sick had something, was something that they'd done that was really weak or wrong or possibly even vaguely sort of unpatriotic. Now, Hodgkinson quotes the headlines of a British newspaper: Britain loses 50 million man-hours this year to illness. And he said, hang on, since when did you owe the British government your man-hours? And whoops, this year they're coming up short because you were sick. And he said, who are you working for anyway? And this is a really good question for artists to keep asking themselves, because sometimes the answer is really not obvious. It just gets a little lost. Plus, there's so much pressure to keep up with new technology, keep working so you can keep getting more stuff, so you can keep competing, and it's a lot of stuff that you don't really need that much anyway, and it's completely exhausting. Even little kids are taught that you need this stuff, and I was talking to on my phone a few days ago, and there was a 5-year-old who said, "Are you still talking on that old thing?" And I said, "What are you, an Apple rep or something? I mean, what do you care that this phone is like slightly outmoded?" The United States is full of hard workers, and quite a few are really seriously, almost psychotically overachievers, you know. And you know the ones I mean, the ones who hand you their resumes as soon as you meet, blog nonstop about their accomplishments, and the ones who tell you how many wildly different projects they're working on simultaneously and how incredibly tired they are. So you are not only asked to admire the fact that they're overworking themselves, but also you're supposed to really sympathize with them for being so tired. And I know these people pretty well because some days I'm one of them and I'm trying so hard not to be, but it's easy and tempting to turn your studio into an office, start thinking of yourself as a small business, then maybe a bigger business, and then at that point you might as well be doing business, you know, like figuring out what people want and making it and then selling it to them. Anyway, part of defining what's work and what's fun comes back to what it means to create reality. And of course, we're in the middle of our national elections, which means we're once again in the season of stories. The candidates create their stories about how they see the past and how they imagine the future. And then they tell you the stories about how things got that way and what things might look like in the future. And then basically you vote for the story you like the best. And there are lots of really challenging and really troubling things in American culture these days. We have an enormous, of course, prison population, for example. 1 in every 100 Americans is in prison. And recent legislation resulting in laws that have basically repealed our constitutional rights for trials and juries, for example, which are really completely hair-raising, all in the name of national security. So, as an artist, what do you do, if anything? Do artists have the responsibility to make the world better? Do they have any more of a responsibility than postmen do, than traders on the stock exchange, than the people selling flowers or burgers or cell phones? Well, for one thing, as I said, you know, artists have very, very sharp tools, and you can easily get people singing along to your tune, and they might not even realize that they're singing, but the melody is so beautiful that they sing it anyway, and it just seeps into their minds. And this is the way propaganda works. This is the way advertising works. So artists who use these tools really have to be careful when taking on big, controversial issues and complex things. Now, I myself have a lot of trouble with using art to change the world. In some ways, it seems like a very 19th century idea that art should make the world a better place. And when I hear that, I think, better for who? Better for you, for me, for your friends, for that person over there? I mean, and I absolutely hate it when people tell me what to think or what to do. I think, you don't even know me. Why are you telling me this? Plus, my grandmother was a missionary, and I saw how that backfired. She was a Southern Baptist. She went to Japan to try to convert Buddhists, but she didn't bother to learn a single word of Japanese. She just sang hymns in English and kind of hoped for the best. You know, obviously the Japanese had no idea what she was trying to convey, but they did like her hats a lot. And she was a Southerner and very, very vain, and she made her own hats, which were elaborate creations of hanging violets and veils and bunches of grapes and so on. And the Japanese saw her hats and they said, "How do you make those?" And so she taught them how to make hats. And she was a rose gardener, and she loved the way they cut bonsai. So they taught her how to cut bonsai, and that was the exchange. It wasn't a conversion, but, you know, everybody got something they could use. But back to the politics and art, I don't necessarily think that political art is any better or more worthwhile or more relevant than making like a giant blue painting. I mean, we need giant blue paintings, and they can sometimes be much more about freedom than works of art that tell you how to be free. Giant blue paintings can show you. But as an artist, I'm always drawing and redrawing the lines between art and politics. And the thing is that they both really do have to do with freedom. And so as an artist, it's the ground of absolutely everything. The reason I'm an artist is that it's one of the few things that you can do in this world in which you are totally free. Absolutely no one tells you what you can do and what you can't do. Now, at the moment, the Occupy movement has shifted the American political landscape, and I really find it very inspiring because it doesn't have an agenda, or it doesn't have a list of demands. Oh, please, you rare and rich and important people, give us this or that. You know, they've made it much harder than that and simpler. The demand is, how do you think? How do you see what's happening in this country? Is this okay with you? Forget what I think. What do you think we should do, if anything? Now, in this spirit, I'm part of a group called Occupy Art, and our first action was in the plaza at the Metropolitan Opera last December. And there was a production of Satyagraha, which is an opera by Philip Glass. And this opera is the story of the time Gandhi spent in South Africa when he was inventing his form of civil disobedience. And he was working out questions like, when do you stand up and resist? And when do you remain passive and say nothing? And we thought, great subject for an opera, but I wonder what civil disobedience would look like today in the Empire State. So we staged an action at Lincoln Center with hundreds of our brand new group called Occupy Art after the opera. So picture this, it's a freezing cold night and very glistening, sparkling, glamorous Lincoln Center, and after the opera, everyone comes out and they've just seen this amazing piece, and then, whoa, the plaza is surrounded by police and rings of demonstrators. And what is this, Act 5? You know, part of the opera? I mean, maybe opera should stay on stages. But then Phil Glass came out, and he stood with the demonstrators and the opera goers, and he read from the libretto of the opera, which was from the Bhagavad Gita and in Sanskrit. So he read an English translation of the text, this ancient text, in mic check style, this non-electronic form of amplification. He says one thing, the closest ring of people repeat it, Greek chorus style, and on out to the outer rings of the crowd. And it was a really hair-raising text, thousands of years old, which we repeated, when your government breaks, when your government breaks. When do you stand up? When do you stand up? When do you stand up? And when do you stay silent? And when do you stay silent? And when do you stay silent? And the opera goers pressed in on the metal barricades, and the barricades fell down, and it was one of the greatest moments of my life in this country. Now, when I was a student at SVA in the early 70s, I was invited to be in a huge sculpture show in Rome, and this was one of these sprawling international shows. And when I arrived, they said, well, there'd been a few delays, and the show was going to open just like a little bit later. And I said, how much later? And they said, well, about 10 days. And I said, but I'm here now. And they said, yes, you are. Ciao, hello. And my teacher, Saul Lewitt, was also there. And instead of saying, what a disaster, he said, you know, this is great. We can just walk around Rome for 10 days, you know, no map, no plan, just learn the city ourselves. And so we did. And it was this attitude towards life, this ability to see a problem as an opportunity that changed me more than years in classes. And Saul Lewitt also was an artist who was incredibly generous. And I remember one cold, rainy afternoon, we were walking into a plaza, and there was a painter standing there, and he was wearing a beret and a smock, and he was actually holding out his thumb to get at the scale right, and I was about to make some kind of really sarcastic, supposedly clever remark about how corny that was, and Saul said, wow, you know, it really takes dedication to paint on a day like today. And I thought it was this appreciation of other artists and the effort it takes to make things that was so beautiful, so striking. And the amazing thing is that you, all of you, have had the advantage of being in a school in which change and flux are really at the center of your training. Your teachers are artists, and they don't just sit there doing their style over and over again. They keep redefining what it means to be an artist. And of course, we live in a time when people are asked to keep learning new things or really required to learn new things. A couple of generations ago, one career would last you your whole lifetime. You could be a salesman or a doctor and your whole life, and then your kids would pick up on the next generation of work skills and maybe become software designers or whatever. These days, things are speeding up even more, and people often have to learn a whole new way to work in the middle of their life, and they're sometimes not prepared for that. So for artists, learning new ways to do things is what we do every day. We learned to be light on our feet. Now, I just want to say a couple of things to keep it on the short side, things that I've tried to learn as an artist. One is to make sure that whatever you do, keep some of your privacy. We live in a culture of transparency and revealing all sorts of personal things, and a lot of my own work involves saying things in public that are kind of personal, so I can't really criticize this, but just make sure you keep some things for yourself, some things that only you find funny or only you find interesting. And next, don't invite journalists into your living room. Meet them on your porch or whatever you use as a porch, your corner bar, whatever. Anyway, another thing is make sure to keep it loose and leave room for this weird whatever phone call that might come or the person you meet who can change your whole direction. And then sometimes also try to make your very, very worst work. You will learn a lot about what it is that you're trying to do. It's like one of the exercises my Tibetan meditation teacher said. He's saying, try to practice feeling sad without actually being sad. And this is really, really hard. I mean, there are lots of sad things in the world, and you don't want to miss them because you're afraid of them, or because much of art comes out of regrets and loss and sadness. But you don't want to become sad, so try it. How to feel sad without being sad. It also reminds me a little bit of some advice that Jackie Kennedy gave to women about how to smile without involving your eyes because you don't want to get wrinkles. So just smile, and don't smile with your eyes, just your mouth. Try it, it's really hard. Now, there are so many things you can't put into words, and I always myself wanted to sing like a violin, which is my instrument. And so a while ago, I figured out how to do this. And it involves this little device, which is called a pillow speaker. And you put it in your pillow at night so that you can do things like learn German in your sleep. And this never worked for me. I just woke up feeling like really paranoid. And also, I like to tinker with small things, and I'm the kind of person who gets a kind of thrill out of putting electronics in my mouth. So this is a short song for a pillow speaker, and it goes like this. Thank you. And welcome to the art world. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Now it is my honor to introduce to you a member of the Board of Directors of the School of Visual Arts, Janet Knox.
Laurie, can I borrow that to try to do this? For the challenging the audacities of artistic experience and inducing us to reassess our views of the nature of art. For your trailblazing exploration of time and space in life and art, querying the mysteries and memory and the unbounded results of the past, realms of the past, future. For your stirring capacity to invest your creations with the vital links between that which is art in life and that which is life and art. For your pioneering uses of a multitude of media, innovative technology, and inventive devices of your own, making all incandescently united to produce historic performances. For your compassionate moral choice to emphasize the sovereignty of humanistic values over the imperatives of technology while respecting its service to your artistic objectives. For your unremitting pursuit of the meaning of life reflected in a constellation of musical, literary, religious, historical, scientific, political, and philosophical creations. And for these accomplishments and many others, the School of Visual Arts confers upon you its highest award, the degree of Doctor of Fine Arts.
I'm speechless. Thank you. Thank you so much.